All right, everybody, we are back. Okay, so I am going to be continuing with my review of the discussion with uh, Miles Donahue and Mike Huemer. I had to check. I don't know if it's a new channel, but go check out the channel, subscribe. I think it's a great discussion so far. We got about 20 minutes into it in the last video, and there's a lot of stuff I agreed with Huemer about. So I'll quickly recap the main couple of points. One, it does turn out, if you look at a survey, the 2020 Phil paper survey, most analytic philosophers are more realists, 62%. We've talked about this many times in the channel before. And realists will often leverage that fact to say, hey, we're in the majority. That counts as a presumption in favor of realism. That's not the main point that Huemer makes in bringing that up. He brings up the fact that there's been this general sentiment within academic philosophy for a long time that most philosophers are anti-realists. And he says, hey, if most people think that a particular view is popular, but they hold a dissenting view, that's evidence. And then it turns out a majority actually hold the dissenting view. That's evidence of the dissenting view. And I agree with him. I don't think it's very strong evidence. It's a little point of evidence, but it's not enough to like tip the scales in favor of moral realism. I doubt he would think that either. But it's very, very weak evidence. The other thing that I would point out is I don't know if currently most philosophers think most philosophers are anti-realists. Many of them are going to be aware of the Phil paper survey results or something like that. Maybe it's just permeated the atmosphere of contemporary academic philosophy. People are now aware, yeah, majority of philosophers are realists. But the other point he makes is that the realism versus anti-realism, that's it. So I think we would both agree that is a legitimate conceptual distinction, dividing line, and all that. But it may not be the most important one. And so what he stresses is, his position, it's a non-naturalist realist position. He refers to his position as ethical intuitionism. He says, yeah, it's really a more central distinction, or more maybe like a better battleground to hinge things on, is the non-naturalist realists, the ethical intuitionists. A point I would make is you could be a non-naturalist realist and not be an ethical intuitionist. At least I think you can. I don't know how exactly he's using the term ethical intuitionism, but I don't know that we need to incorporate an epistemological component into our non-naturalist realism, because I see that as a metaphysical thing. Maybe he'd agree. I don't know. So, but in any case, it doesn't really matter that much. We could use the terms pretty interchangeably for the purposes of the point he's making. It's really the non-naturalist realists versus everybody else. That's a more central distinction, because in certain ways, the naturalist realists are kind of in a very similar boat to many anti-realists. Now, maybe some naturalists would very strongly disagree with that. And what I've said is I really think it's more like a game of rock, paper, scissors, and that the reasons naturalists and non-naturalists have for rejecting anti-realism are often pretty similar. And this goes around the whole circle, right? So anti-realists and non-naturalist realists have similar reasons for objecting to naturalism. And then what would it be? Naturalists and non-naturalists have similar reasons for rejecting anti-realism. And then anti-realists and naturalists would have similar reasons for rejecting realism. So you got this kind of rock, paper, scissors thing going. And I think that's a better way to frame the dispute, not as a one side versus another, because you could always arbitrarily lump two of the three together and claim a majority with respect to that particular point, and you would be right. So which majority is the most dialectically central? I don't know. For some reason, there's been this focus on realism versus anti-realism, and I don't even think it's the most important. And I think Huemer agrees about that. And if that's the case, that's the point, though. If that's the case, okay, so there's more realists than there are anti-realists. So realists win the popularity contest on that one. Okay, but there's more. What Huemer suggests descriptivists. I actually like that that suggestion. Sorry. Realists. Sorry. I like that distinction between non-naturalist realists and descriptivists. So I could go around saying, hey, majority philosophers are descriptivists, and in fact, that majority of descriptivists versus non-naturalists is almost identical. Because if you look at the numbers, it's 26.6% in favor of non-naturalist realism and 26.1% in favor of anti-realism. Non-naturalists are almost exactly the same amount as anti-realists. So it frustrates me a little because it's more like a game of rock, paper, scissors, like three different factions for non-naturalists to recruit naturalists to their side to say we're in a majority, when the naturalist and non-naturalist positions are radically different from one another. The non-naturalists have no business saying we have more of a primacy, or we're in a stronger position because there's so many of us, compared to anti-realists, because they're almost indistinguishable in terms of total proportion. And when you look at that data, they have another question. So one of them is like realism, anti-realism. And the other is asking non-naturalist, naturalist, constructivist, expressivist, error theorist. And if you add up all the constructivists, expressivists, and error theorists, you get something a little funny. It's more than 26.1%. So I don't know how many of those constructivists are not considering themselves anti-realists, but in principle, like many of them would be. I don't know how they're adding those numbers up or how they're conceptualizing these things. I would like to get like higher resolution data on both meta ethicists and philosophers more generally and how they carve up these things. Oh, and you may be wondering, well, what if we look at just the philosophers that specialize in meta ethics? Do the numbers change? Yes, it actually goes up a marginal amount. It goes up to 65% moral realist instead of 62%. I don't know how much the naturalist versus non-naturalist numbers change. My guess, we could go look, I guess, is that the non-naturalists would increase as a proportion. And then they would like, so if you look at specialists, it only increases slightly. But the distribution of naturalists versus non-naturalists might change. Okay, so I said about a bit about that, and let me. I'll check out the chat. So let me do that, and then we will get into the next part of the video. All right. All right. So I don't remember, when did I start? Well, so Mike, you were there for the last video and this one. So I have the authority here. So I'm going to give you Lance Salute for that. So Mike, you get 1,000 Lance Salute for being very diligent for both videos. But we'll continue with JP. You're going to get 1,000 Lance Salute too. I got a lot of Lance Salute. I could hand it all out. So JP, you get 1,000 Lance Salute. Harmonica, you get 500. You get to keep the Lance Salute from last time. So didn't I just give you 1,000? So Mike gets 1,000. JP gets 1,000. Harmonica gets 500, and Igor gets 250. Mason Colbert, you are unfortunately too late for it, but you got Jupiter there, and Jupiter is cool, so you get 100 Lance Salute. Esau, I don't know how to say that. I'm sorry, but no Lance Salute. Sorry, you're at the cutoff. Oh wait, hold on. So the comment is, finally, I'm able to watch a little bit of Lance's review about this Huemer's video live with like a, this going on. So because it's a positive, friendly remark, 100 Lance Salute to you too. We got a ton of it to give out today. All right. Harmonica says, apart from how ethical naturalists are moral realists, is moral realism about categorical imperatives? It's a little complicated. So moral realism, I would say that it's about stance-independent moral facts. It's about whether there are moral truths that are true independent of your goal standards or values. I wouldn't tend to frame it in terms of categorical imperatives. I don't even know why. I don't see people do that a whole lot, and I'm just following convention. Like, this is, people make the dividing line on stance dependence versus stance independence. That I don't even know if that people have always done that. Some people think you should make the dividing line on like just whether there are moral facts or not, and then that would include certain types of realism and constructivism. I don't really like that, and I've had discussions of. I think in the last video I was having discussions with people in the chat about various ways of drawing out the distinction. But stance independence versus dependence, or sorry, it really isn't. It's not either you think there's stance independent facts or there's stance dependent facts. It's either you think there's stance independent facts or you don't, and then you're an anti-realist. You might think there's stance dependent moral facts, but you don't have to think there's any type of moral facts. Okay, so that's just typically where people have drawn the dividing line. And I don't want to get into like a basic overview of that whole thing. If you want a breakdown of the standard way of framing meta ethics, go check out Kane B's channel. He's got excellent videos on this. All right. Matt says, don't devalue my Lance Salute by handing it out willy-nilly. Well, I hate inflation. So here's what we'll do. Next video, there's no Lance Salute. If I remember, I'll probably forget. So then there'll be no Lance Salute. So that'll keep the Lance Salute. Or no, that's going to cut down the incentive. I'll give out half Lance Salute for a bit. Maybe we'll do that. Half Lance Salute. Sound good? All right. That's what we'll do. We'll keep it a valuable currency. We certainly have to. What is it, Nathan Nichols? We got to keep ahead of Nathan Nichols. Flaming Hell says, "Can I get irreducible Lance Salute?" Unfortunately, not. We just closed off the pipe. We're not minting more right now. Andrew Moy says, "I still don't get how the dissenting view thing is supposed to be evidence. It seems like it would be equally predicted on either hypothesis." I don't think so. I think the idea roughly is that if a person is able and willing to hold a view in spite of the fact that it isn't the most popular view, that all else being equal, that's more likely. They're more likely to hold that view for good reasons than if they held a view because it's a popular view, because of things like Asch conformity. So people have many people have a tendency to conform to the beliefs and attitudes of others independent of the quality of the evidence for those views, for various sorts of like social conformity type reasons. And so if you have a majority view, in spite of the fact that people that hold the majority view think it's not the majority view, that is stronger evidence of the truth of the view than if people hold a majority view and they're aware it's a majority view. Does that make sense? Yeah, not that you have to agree with it. I'm just saying, I just hope the explanation makes sense, but maybe you disagree. All right. Video. I think it's a little before where we're at. That's okay.
Pain, or painfulness of the property, and then there's the universal goodness, and they stand in a certain relation to each other. It's similar to how, like, two-ness and evenness stand in this relation to each other necessarily.
Okay, so that would be something of a metaphysical grounding for moral truth.
Yeah, I mean, like, I think this is just sort of like a description of any like any general abstract truth, right?
If you're a
Like,
Platonist.
Yeah, which as we've discussed is trivially true. So
Right, I'll see. So okay, that is helpful, and I don't have any real concerns about moral realism itself. I think it's true, and I think any objections I would raise or want to get your answers to would be more properly to the epistemology behind ethical intuitionism. So
yeah,
that second feature of intuitionism is that we know these moral truths via intuition. So
How do you add this stuff to video? I don't even know how to do this. I'm the lamest. I'm so low budget. I just go with purple lights and that's it. And even that took me 2 years to get. Anyway, I really like that he does this stuff. I got to figure out how to do this.
most succinct way you can, what is it to know a truth via intuition? What does intuition mean here? Because that's a word that's thrown around in philosophy as well as popular culture, and it means a variety of different things. So what does it mean here?
Yeah. So it's good to know that in philosophy, intuition is used as something of a technical term. It's not to be taken as just like whatever the ordinary colloquial use of intuition in ordinary language. So in my account, intuitions are a type of appearance. They're initial intellectual appearances. Okay, what are appearances? Appearances are a type of mental state that you have that you're reporting, I claim, when you say that something seems to you to be the case or appears to be the case.
Right. So it's a type of mental state that you're having when you say that something seems to be the case or
appearances. Okay, what are appearances? Appearances are a type of mental state that you have that you're reporting, I claim, when you say that something seems to you to be the case or appears to be the case.
Right. So I'm very skeptical that there is any distinctive type of mental state that would correspond to what he's describing here. That there's a specific type of mental state that you're having when you report is something seeming to be the case, like intellectually. This is different from saying it seems to me there's a tree over there, like I'm looking at a tree, or like I have a cup. It seems that there's a cup. Intellectual seemings. So something I said in the last video, I don't, as far as I can tell, I don't have these. I don't have a phenomenology of things appearing to be true. That seems at best like an extremely strained and somewhat weird metaphor for perception, especially perhaps visual perception. And I don't experience philosophical considerations or something like 2 + 2 = 4 or 11 is a prime number. That doesn't seem true to me in a way that has any sort of phenomenology associated with it. So I don't have these mental states as far as I can tell. And so, here he's giving I like that he's saying something like it's the mental state that we're reporting or we're having when we say these things. I like that because there's a sort of semi-behavioral, there's a partial behavioral component to it that seems to really put this in the realm of potentially being evaluated by empirical psychology. And I would love to know whether this is supposed to be because clearly if someone is reporting, hey, it seems to me that you should pull the switch in the trolley case and you should not push in the footbridge scenario of the trolley problem and the footbridge scenarios respectively. It seems to me that you should pull the switch, but you shouldn't push in the footbridge. That seems true to me. They're having some kind of mental states, probably a lot of them. But are they distinct? Are they is there some special phenomenology associated with them? Or are they involving any distinctive set of cognitive mechanisms that we could identify? And when people are having intuitions in different philosophical domains, like epistemology, metaphysics, and ethics, are they drawing on the same cognitive systems or different cognitive systems? And when people are reporting intellectual seemings, are those distinct from non-intellectual seemings or not? And if so, distinct in what respects? Do they draw on distinct cognitive mechanisms? Do they have distinctive functional purposes? Are they localized to specific regions of the brain or specific types of brain activity? Is there, activation of the, ventromedial prefrontal cortex? Like, what exactly is going on when people have intellectual seemings? If this is amenable to empirical research, I'd like to see the empirical research because, I personally, my guess is that if we had a really well developed account of human cognition, that at no point in our account that, because it's likely going to include things for which we do have, not perfectly developed, but reasonably advanced theories having to do with perception, memories, emotions, judgments, deliberation and reasoning, cognitive heuristic. There's a variety of mental states. If you, I don't like the mental state language, but there's a variety of psychological phenomena that one would posit that if an account of human cognition excluded them, there would be something missing from it. Imagine I had a complete account of human cognition and I didn't mention memory at all. There'd be something wrong with it. Or if I didn't mention perception, there'd be something very wrong with it. And if it had no emotion, there'd be something wrong with it. But can you have an account of the way humans generally function in the world that doesn't posit intellectual seemings? I suspect you can. I don't know that these are actually playing any functional role in anything humans typically do. They appear to play a role because of the way people talk about them consistently in contemporary analytic philosophy. But is that characteristic of any conventional features of human cognition? What I suggested in the last video is that I think that these are a type of pseudo psychological phenomenon. So he's saying it's a type of mental state. I don't think these are real. I don't have them, and I don't think other people have them. And I think they're a type of pseudo psychology, a bit like seeing auras. So a guru can convince people that they could see auras, and they'll go around reporting, "I can see this person's aura. They have a pink aura. They have a green aura. I can see their energy fields." They can't see energy fields. So I don't know if people acquire a learned capacity for some type of hallucination or synesthesia or something like that. I don't know if there's actually any distinctive phenomenology that you can learn to have, or whether it's this like purely verbal thing going on. But this this would probably be something that a lot of philosophers balk at. But generally speaking, if intuitions are supposed to pick out a distinctive type of mental state, I literally don't think that's a thing. I don't think they exist at all. I'm not saying I don't think we should use them as evidence. I'm saying I don't think they're real. So when people scoff at this, they'll say, well, surely, uh, people have dispositions to believe things. So if you ask me, do I think that Bigfoot is real? Do I absolutely, with total certainty on the matter, know whether Bigfoot's real or not? No. But if you said, what's your gut tell you? You might, I don't think Bigfoot's real. There's a variety of other situations. Like I might have a judgment about a Gettier problem. Like you describe some case and a person, it has a correct justified belief by accident. It's like serendipitous that they happen to, have that belief. Do I think it's an instance of knowledge? And, a person might go, nah. And you might call that like a semantic intuition or a conceptual intuition or a philosophical intuition. Are those mental states associated with that continuous with our other mental states? Is it just some type of, like it's a judgment or something? Like to compare, people make grammaticality judgments. So you could give me a sentence in English and I could probably do a decent job much of the time telling you whether the sentence is grammatical or not. And if you ask me why, I may go, I don't know. And so there might be judgments we can make that are fairly reliable that are non-inferential. Like I come to reliable, true beliefs about certain sorts of things, but no explicit inference was made. And I couldn't even tell you what caused me to have that belief if I asked. Does that happen? Absolutely. And so if that's what you're talking about by intuition, then intuitions are real. If you're talking about a disposition to believe certain things, but it doesn't guarantee belief, and you're saying that's what an intuition, fine, those are intuitions. Is that what he's talking about here? I don't think so. I'm not sure. And so we have a problem, which is that intuition talk in philosophy is sloppy. It's underdeveloped, underspecified. It's super ambiguous. And the people using this terminology are rarely clear about what they're talking about. Now, he's being a bit more clear than most people, and power to him for doing that. But once you start specifying what an intuition is, we can then ask the question, is that a real thing? And what you don't want anyway, and he's not doing this, but philosophers can do this, and I think sometimes they do this, is they'll Mott and Bailey on it. So they'll say, imagine I have intuition as a special quasi-mystical faculty that you use the power of the intellect to gain, you're like Professor Xavier or something like that, to gain deep insight into the fundamental nature of the cosmos in a way that's totally inaccessible to the empirical sciences or something like that. You go me with like your brain, like a little antenna, and you have these special a priori truths or something. Okay, that's like a superpower, and I don't think anybody has that. But if someone goes, no, 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 so you're denying people have a disposition to believe things? Are you some kind of idiot? No, I'm not denying that. So, well, then you think intuitions exist? Yes, I do. Okay, so people can go nee, and tap into the Platonic realm with their minds. No, I don't think that. Oh, so you're denying people have intuitions? Are you some kind of idiot? Of course, people have a disposition to believe things. No. So they can have intuitions where intuition means a disposition to believe. It doesn't mean they have the Platonic power with their antenna to detect secret truths. So you have, like, again, humor doesn't do this, but philosophers do this all the time, is they get all tricky with language and in ways that obscure what they're talking about. They're not specific enough. They're ambiguous as hell. And it's really, really frustrating. A lot of academic philosophers aren't this way, but man, if you go into online debate spaces, people are super duper 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 unclear, and I really hate it. Um, so we got to get clear on what intuitions are, and I just don't think philosophers are clear enough. Like, so he's saying that we have these mental states, uh, based on what? How does he know this? So, if this is a self-report about what his phenomenology is like, and it's based on like anecdotal experience of interacting with people, that's fine. But I don't think that's enough to establish that a phenomena is real. If most people thought that they could see auras or speak to gods, I mean, there was whole populations of people that think that they could talk to gods or spirits. Well, they can't. Spirits aren't real. They can't talk to spirits, and yet they would believe it. And so it is possible for sub-communities or communities of people to believe that they are having certain types of experiences that they are not having. And so, what I suspect is that philosophers, this disposition to report having intellectual seemings is a learned behavior that philosophers have that I don't think non-philosophers have. I think this is not a real type of psychological state. Okay. Oh, right. Okay. Matt Springfield says, I can hear that something is in tune or out of tune. Is that something you doubt as you doubt auras? No, not at all. In tune, so people have like perfect pitch, and people have a detectable functional capacity for distinguishing whether things are in tune or out of tune. Yeah, I mean, you could test that, and that's pretty easy to test. So there's means of externally corroborating whether a person has perfect pitch or something. And if philosophers want to show that they have like intellectual seemings, how would they show that? Like, it's just going to be a bunch of self-reports.
There are many different kinds of appearances. So there are sensory appearances, like you see the table in front of you and you have an appearance of the table, like it appears there's a table. It looks like a table. It seems like there's a table. Okay. There are memory appearances, like, I seem to remember eating breakfast this morning. So you're going to have this like experiential memory. Okay, that's an appearance.
Yeah, so I'm uncomfortable with this talk of appearances. It doesn't seem to me like I had breakfast this morning. Like, I have a memory that I had breakfast this morning. I don't know what work the seem talk is doing here. Yeah. Seems like I had breakfast this morning. I'm inclined to believe I had breakfast this morning. It appears, it seems I had breakfast this morning. That seems strange to me to use the seems language. So is this like, is the term super loose? Like, it's referring to reportable mental states of any particular kind? I don't know what work it's doing. If it's too broad, I don't know what it's picking out, and if it's too narrow, I don't know if it's real.
Appearances are not necessarily tied to the actual fact. So you could have the appearance of having eaten a pancake and be wrong. You could have misremembered or whatever. Okay.
Yeah, and that seems fine. It certainly seems like we have certain types of psychological states whereby we are disposed, like maybe he wouldn't use it language this way, or this isn't what he's referring to, but I'm inclined to believe things that are not true. Like, I'm like, I remember doing that, or I think I remember doing that, and then it turns out I didn't do it. Like, I remember closing the garage or locking the door when I left the house, but then it turns out I didn't. I have I misremember. So yeah, like he's talking about he's I think appropriately recognizing that and drawing attention to the fact that we have psychological states that have some relevance to our disposition, attitudes, or stance on what's true or false, and that they can be false. But in this case, I don't. Again, if it's too narrow, I'm not sure if something corresponds to it. If it's very broad, I'm not sure what he's encompassing in this.
Okay, so there's sensory appearances, memory appearances, and that there are intellectual appearances. These happen when you think about something.
So I could address this question. Does the fact that you wanted to say this seems talk seems strange to me give support to seems talk, or do you think that you're just already submerged in philo lingo? No, I don't think I'm submerged in philo lingo. People say seems all the time. Like it seems like it's raining out right now. Right now. So when I'm saying seems in this context, I mean, I didn't do that to be intentionally ironic, to be super clever. I did in fact just reflexively say seems. Part of it might be that I'm primed to say it that way, although it did immediately. I recognized the irony of it, so I thought that was funny. But no, when I'm reporting seems talk, it's not associated with anything that I would recognize as a distinctive shared phenomenology that sort of uh, goes across all the different types of seeming. It's so seem can be used as a epistemic hedge. So I could say something like, "It seems like it's raining," and what does that tell you? Well, it tells you that a variety of features associated with my disposition to make judgments about what's true or false are inclining me towards judging that it may be raining, but I'm not entirely sure. So if I was standing in the rain, I wouldn't say it seems to be raining. I'd say it is raining. But if there's like a couple droplets land on my head, maybe a bird just pooed on me. I don't know, but I might say, "Oh, it seems like it's raining," and then I might look around, see, hold your hands out, see if you get another rain droplet. So seeming for me is a functional term that is used as an epistemic hedge, among other things. So I don't use it to describe any sort of special phenomenology, but maybe Huemer's not either. And maybe he would just say, "Yeah, that's all I mean by seeming." But then what exactly does he mean? And I'm being a little nitpicky here. And maybe if we had a conversation about this, we would come to an agreement, and I would be like, yeah, seemings, there's seemings of that kind. But I think he does stuff with seemings that I wouldn't do with them. And so I do worry that I don't know if that's due to background epistemological positions that he holds, or whether he's actually attempting to directly refer to psychological states that I wouldn't think are real. So I don't know where the action is at in our metaphilosophical and our epistemological differences, whether it's in he thinks that there are psychological states that have certain properties that I don't think the psychological states are real, or we're both referring to the same psychological states, but I don't think they have the properties he has, or we're both referring to a certain type of psychological state. And for, maybe this isn't that distinct from the last one. There's sort of additional philosophical considerations he has about the characteristics of those psychological states that we otherwise agree about. And it's those other considerations that lend them their weight. There's a big difference between someone thinking that there's a unicorn and then I don't think there's unicorns, and then thinking the horse over there is magical. And I'm like, I agree there's a horse over there, but I don't think it's magical. And I don't know which one of those disputes we're having when it comes to intuitions. I don't know if there is a horse over there and I just don't think it has the powers he thinks it has, or whether he thinks there are unicorns effectively. I hope that analogy conveys the idea here. I'm not sure which is going on. Yes, Matt says, do you agree, or does it even make sense to you that eventually all philosophical views ground out in seemings? I still don't know what seemings are. So, some people get real snippy about this. Oh, like I'm just being picky about this stuff. Philosophers will nitpick and turn over every rock that one could possibly turn over about every little matter of philosophical interest. They'll get all nitpicky about knowledge, all nitpicky about goodness or badness. And when I get nitpicky about the tools they use to do so, suddenly there are a bunch of assholes that think that these aren't worthwhile questions and we can't get nitpicky about it. Nah, we can't. And I'm going to get nitpicky about it. And they should shut up and get on board and do it. Again, I'm talking about other people, like people I talk to. This has nothing to do with Mike. Mike, I think, would be perfectly happy to have meta-philosophical discussions. Now, he tends to put his foot down on certain issues and say, look, I think this is trivially true. But I've never seen any indication that doesn't make him receptive to and willing to talk to people that totally disagree with him. So, not an issue. I think we could probably have a productive discussion about this. I don't think we would have a discussion where we could persuade one another. And this is something I commented about in the last video. I really worry about mutual philosophical incorrigibility. The starting points that Huemer's at, I don't think he could come over to my side of things, and I'm not sure I could come over to his side of things. And I don't know what to make of that. That's a little troubling. Oh, right. Let's keep going.
And the thing just seems to you to be true. So I think about, the shortest path between any 2 points is a straight line, and that just seems to me like that has to be true. Right. So that's
Yeah, so that doesn't seem to me to be true. That's the sort of thing I would learn. So I compared math to like the rules of a game. So take the game Magic the Gathering. If you tap a mountain, you get 1 red mana. It seems to me very strange to say that would seem true. Like I'd say that is true because I know the rules, and like given certain axioms or like rules in mathematics, certain sorts of things follow from that. I might start doing like some type of mental imagery thing. Like you could say, okay, well, what if you put this shape on top of that shape? What kind of shape? Like imagine sticking 2 triangles together when you get like a trapezoid or something. Like I could do that in my mind using mental imagery, and I'd say it seems. But that is that an intellectual seeming? Maybe then I have an intellectual seeming, but I that seems to me like I'm using mental imagery or something. Is there some analog for like a judgment that murder is wrong or something? Or like sometimes people say murder is by definition wrong, so it'd be silly to say murder is wrong, but like abortion is wrong or abortion is not wrong. When a person makes that sort of judgment and it seems true, is that similar to like mental rotation tasks or something? I don't know. Is it supposed to be? Maybe it doesn't matter. I don't know what's supposed to matter here. I don't know if it's the phenomenology. I don't know if it's some functional considerations. I don't know what's supposed to be relevant to picking something out as an intellectual seeming as opposed to some other kind of seeming.
that's an intellectual appearance. In fact, there are 2 kinds of intellectual appearances. There's inferential and intuitive intellectual appearances. Right. The inferential appearance is where you consider a certain fact, and then you consider another proposition in the light of that fact. And it seems like the second thing has to be true in light of the first one. All right. So now, okay, I should have thought of a good example of this, but anyway, that's the basis for making inferences. So if you believe A and you believe if A, that in the light of those 2 facts, B has to be true.
Right. So maybe an example he could have used would be like transitivity or something like that. So let's say A is larger than B and B is larger than C, then I could conclude that A is larger than C. And so what you might think is that one has the intellectual appearance that given that A is larger than B and B is larger than C, I have the intellectual appearance that therefore A is larger than C. Maybe that's an example he would be cool with. That would seem true to you. I don't have seemings of that. Or if I do, I don't know what part of that I'm supposed to. What's the seeming part? Like I think that's true. Why would he use the term seeming for that? I'm not sure what seeming is doing here, and I guess I would just need to talk to him or other people that express things in these terms to get a better sense. But I've read stuff people have said about this, and I am mystified by what they could be talking about here.
All right. So, and then the contrast to an inferential appearance, the other kind of intellectual appearance is where you just think about B by itself and it just seems to you like it has to be true. Okay. So the non-inferential intellectual appearances, those are intuitions.
I think where I would have some criticism is that he's repeatedly describing seemings by just saying, this is a seeming, this is a seeming, this is a seeming. And we're not getting a richer account of the kinds of stuff that would, if someone didn't know what he was talking about, that would get them to go, that's what it is. Now, the distinction might help, but I don't think it's enough.
Okay. Now, ethical intuitions are just intuitions that you have when you're thinking about ethics. So these would be, you think about some action maybe and it just seems to you like it would be wrong. Or you think about some state of affairs and it just seems good to you. So that's an
Yeah. So this is something I could categorically say, I don't have this at all. So if you give me some moral scenario, I'll tell you whether I think it's morally right or wrong or good or bad. Like, let's say someone says, hey, what if someone wanted to commit a genocide, like for fun or for a cup of tea? Like, it's already bad, but just make it so ridiculously malicious and awful where, like, it's just the worst, the most trivial, stupid motivation possible for doing something. And then you ask me, what do you think about that? Yeah, I think that's bad. I would want to stop that person. I want them to be punished. I want them to be prevented from doing that if possible. There's all sorts of things I could say about that. But at no point in my judgment about that matter would I say that it seems true that it would be morally bad for them to do that. What I would say is I disapprove of them doing that. I would want to stop them from doing that. That disgusts me. That's horrific. So I might have a certain kinds of emotional responses. I might have certain kinds of intellectual responses. But what I don't have is a seeming that it's true, that it's bad. I don't know what that would be like. I don't know if I've ever experienced that in my life. One of the things that got me into studying moral philosophy is encountering trolley problems and getting to the footbridge case and being told that people have like a seeming or an intuition that you shouldn't push the person in the footbridge case. Now, if you ask me about that, would I push the person in that scenario? I don't think that I would. I can't. I don't think I could bring myself to actively harm somebody under the circumstances, especially because I think in any like if you assure me it's going to save the 5 lives, absolutely. I don't even know how to get myself in that mind space. But if I could, maybe I think it would be the right thing to do because it's utility maximizing. I don't know if I could actually bring myself to do it. So like there's a bunch of stuff I could say about it. Like I'd feel icky about it. I'd feel really guilty about it. I can recognize that it's utility maximizing. There's a bunch of stuff I could say about it, but I don't have any seeming that it's wrong or seeming that it's bad. I don't have that. And I never had that. And I remember having that reaction of going, what the hell what are people talking about? They have intuition. What is that? So that was my reaction to it when I had it, when I first encountered it. And when I started talking about this, some of the reaction I had was like incredulity, like how could you not have an intuition about this? And I remember having discussions where people did this with qualia too. How can you not have the intuition? How can you not? You must have it. You must have it. I had people tell me that I'm being dishonest and disingenuous because I'm saying that I don't have intuitions. That they tell me everybody's. And people might say, look, you might have a contrary intuition, but you got to have an intuition. And I'm like, nope. And so what people will then tell me is I'm the outlier. I'm the odd one out, and I'm not convinced of that. I'm not convinced that I'm the odd one out. I think people are being conditioned into speaking and thinking in terms of reporting and having intuitions. And I don't think that this is like a natural psychological state for people to be in. I don't think this is how people without training in philosophy speak, think, or do things. I think this is a learned behavior. And I think people are inducted into thinking in philosophical terms. I think it's like learning to see auras from a guru. I don't think this is real stuff going on. So I've said enough about that. So let's just keep going with this.
Ethical intuition.
Okay. And on your view, are intuitions self-evident?
Yeah, so let's take this back a little. Let's play this let's play this, take it back a little and then play it a little. I was mixing a bit and little and a biddle. What is wrong with me? At least I could speak now. I had to cancel the stream actually earlier and start a new one because I started choking right when I started the stream. It was ridiculous. I'm sitting here going. Anyway, I wanted to address this before we continue. Andrew Moy says, the quote, think about a proposition by itself, end quote, thing is really weird. I can't really conceive of a way to think about things without any sort of context, but I'm not sure that's what humor means. It might be, I don't know. So, I talk about this in my own work quite a lot because I endorse like a language's use view. I don't think sentences have a meaning outside of a context of usage. And so I give people examples like this. Imagine I say, person A throws a rock at person B. Why did they throw the rock at the person? And if you say, well, what if they were angry at the person? I go, no. There's no more information. Just why did they throw the rock? There is no context. Well, now it's a nonsense question. People, if there might be some causal explanation and in terms of the motivations of the person A, like they were angry at person B or, whatever it might be. But if there is no context, there are no facts. So the question is nonsensical. So, people don't, voluntary actions outside of context of some actual instance, it's like a nonsense idea. A voluntary action is taken for some goal or for some purpose. So if someone said, what was the motivation behind this agent performing an action in some unspecified scenario, there wasn't one. It's like if I said, imagine a person, what color is their hair? What the hell kind of question is that? If I just say, imagine a person, what color is their hair? There's no fact in the matter about what color their hair is. And I see isolated propositions exactly like this. So if someone says, is the sentence stealing is wrong, true or false? Well, who's saying it? What are they trying to do? What do they mean when they're saying that? I would need to know what they mean. So if they say, I disapprove of stealing, it's true. If that's what they mean. If what they mean is there are stance independent fact according to which one has a moral imperative not to steal, that is categorically binding, then no, I don't think that that's true. So it'd be false. And so, or it might be unintelligible. So I would need to know what the person that expressed the sentence means. But then philosophers will say, no, 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 but what do you think moral sentences mean? So don't ask what the person saying the sentence was trying to, like using the sentence was trying to communicate. What did the sentence mean? The sentence didn't mean shit. Sentences don't mean things. People using sentences mean things. What the hell kind of question is that? So I don't think like this sounds insane to some people, but I literally will say sentences do not mean things. But what I mean by that is that the sentence itself doesn't have a meaning. The sentence is used to convey meaning. And the meaning, like if you want to say the sentence is like an integral part of the meaning, fine. But sentences are in the real world are communicative acts, or speech acts that people employ to achieve some communicative goal. There's some reason why the person was using that sentence. And if we don't look at the person's goals or psychology or the functional role that their language is playing in some specific context, what the hell could it possibly mean? I think the answer is it couldn't mean anything. That sentences don't have meanings outside context of usage. And like literally speaking, I don't think they have meanings at all. I think people mean things and they use sentences to mean them. So that's how I would frame it. And so, a lot of analytic philosophy, insofar as it's involved in this sort of decontextualized analysis of isolated propositions, I think it's based on a conception of language that is nonsensical or false. I certainly don't buy into that framework. DeVos just got in. How long has this been going now? 40 minutes. All right.
Okay, now ethical intuitions are just intuitions that you have when you're thinking about ethics. So these would be, you think about some action maybe and it just seems to you like it would be wrong. Or you think about some state of affairs and it just seems good to you. So that's an ethical intuition.
Yeah, I'm going to have issues with that too, because what would it mean for something to seem wrong or seem good? Like I can approve or disapprove of things. I could be for or against things, but I don't know what it would mean for just something to just be wrong. Wrong in what sense? If you say, oh, morally wrong, well, what the hell does that mean? I don't have a sense that things are morally right or wrong, like in some undifferentiated way. I would need to know what exactly is that supposed to mean? I certainly do approve and disapprove of things. So it's not like if someone says, consider the case of someone torturing babies for fun. If you ask me, do you think that's wrong? I'm going to say yes. Well, what about morally wrong? Yes, it's morally wrong. What about morally evil and depraved? Yeah. But when I say that, I'm not saying that there's like special metaphysical properties that are instantiated by the action of like wrongness is manifested by the act. Like I don't have to be a Platonist or have weird metaphysics to have attitudes about stuff. So I don't know the kind of stuff he's reporting here. I'm not sure that I don't have it, and maybe other people have it, but I'm very skeptical.
Okay. And on your view, are intuitions self-evident? Because I know just like intuition, self-evidence is a technical term in this context.
Yeah. It depends on what you mean by self-evident.
Naturally.
So I kind of feel like that term is more confusing than helpful because I just think that people have a bunch of associations. Like they have different properties in mind that people are just jumbling together. So one of the things that people have in mind when they say self-evident is non-inferentially justified. So it's justified and it doesn't require an argument for it. Justified in a way that doesn't require reasons. Okay. But then another thing that people sometimes have in mind is, like they think self-evident propositions must be incorrigible. Like it's impossible to have a basis for correcting it or, for changing it. And it appears to me that people are just confuse those two properties with each other. Those are completely different. Like the claim that I don't need an argument for something is completely different from the claim that I can't have an argument against it. But anyway, people confuse those two together. And then along with that is the idea that the self-evident things are absolutely certain, right? Like probability 1. Okay. So anyway, so what about intuitions? Well, they're non-inferentially justified.
Yeah. So he does a good job of drawing out the distinction here.
So if something seems right, like probability 1. Okay. So anyway, so what about intuitions? Well, they're non-inferentially justified. So if something seems to you to be the case non-inferentially, it makes sense. You're justified in believing, it's reasonable to believe that it is the case unless you have a reason for doubting it. I'm not saying that it's impossible to acquire reasons for doubting it. I'm just saying until you acquire reasons for doubting it, it's reasonable to believe it. Right?
Yeah, so like I would have so many questions about that. I rarely actually critique phenomenal conservatism or this idea like it's non-inferentially justified. I have concerns just with the notion of justification. What work is that doing? Like it's reasonable to believe it. What does that mean? It's like you're allowed to believe it because it can't mean that. You don't need someone's permission to believe things. Now, for me, I would cash out a lot of the times if you ask me, like, is this reasonable to believe? I would say something like, well, the belief, I have like background reasons to think that the belief is such that to act on the belief would be more likely than not to reliably allow me to achieve my goals or act in accordance with my values or something like that. And so there would, of course, there would be some epistemological questions you could ask me about why I think that and how I think that would relate to this case and all sorts of things. But like I would want to cash it out in I'd want it to have cash value. I'd want beliefs that are justified to like function better or be more likely to do something useful for me than beliefs that are not justified. But in principle, a person can just find that they are psychologically disposed to believe pretty much anything. You could just have the intuition that the sky is pink or something, and you would be wrong. Now, what he would say, I think, about this would be that, well, you would be justified all else being equal, and also isn't equal. You have plenty of defeasible reasons to think, no, this guy's not pink. That's wrong. But the whole idea that your starting point is like it's like you win by default unless something defeats you. There's something about that I find very strange. Now, if someone were to just say, well, as a matter of descriptive fact, you will believe things, or it's useful to believe things unless you're given reason to believe otherwise. If you construed it in descriptive terms or pragmatic terms, I might end up endorsing a kind of analog to what he's suggesting here. But I feel like there's some like normative stuff that's getting baked into this notion that I wouldn't be comfortable with. And I do think that other sorts of shenanigans end up going on with the way that people exploit the notion of justification. I don't know that he's necessarily doing that, but I think other people do. And I've talked about that with epistemic blank checks. I've talked about that. It's on my blog, on my videos and stuff. So you could look that up if you want to see what I have to say about that.
So then you can figure out whether that counts as being self-evident.
I see. So the self-evidence speaks to the non-inferential justification of the belief in question.
Yeah.
Okay. So to ask more about the epistemology of the viewpoint, how do we have access to moral facts? Is there any special way in which we come to know moral facts? Because, I mean, you might say, well, it's not a real relevant issue, but I could see how some philosophers would say that this access seems mysterious. These are fundamentally, I suppose non-natural isn't helpful, but evaluative facts that might exist platonically in some sense. But how do we come to know them other than just reasserting this intellectual seeming? Like, how do we have this capacity?
Well, I was going to just read. You think about it and it becomes obvious.
Okay.
So, how do you know that 2 is more than 1? Like the answer is kind of, in a common sense, the answer is because I understand what 2 is, and I understand what 1 is. and if you understand that, then you're just going to see that 2 is more than 1. Okay, how do you know that pain is bad? Well, I felt some pains.
Yeah, and notice that he says sees. So there's this like quasi perceptual language going on here, and I find something strange about that.
I know what pain is like, and it was bad. Okay. Now, like there could be sort of further philosophical questions in the vicinity. Like you might think you have reasons why you shouldn't be able to know that. Right. And if you have specific reasons why you think you shouldn't be able to know that, then we could address that. Okay. So like sometimes people say, well, but there's no causal interaction. So like these are abstract facts about relations between abstract objects, and abstract objects don't have causal powers on concrete objects. And like my brain is a concrete particular object, it's not affected by abstract objects. Okay.
That's where I was going to go. So you preempted me.
Oh, good. Okay. Yeah.
Yeah.
And now, don't exactly know. I don't exactly know what the answer to this is, but I want to point out that this is not like something that's particularly about ethics, right? This is not a challenge for ethics. This is a challenge for knowledge of any abstract truth. And you probably don't want to say that you can't know any abstract truth. So like, numbers don't have causal powers. Like numbers are abstract objects. They don't have causal powers. They don't like move things around in your brain. So how could you have knowledge of them? Right. And so, well,
Yeah, I think I probably would say that you don't like. So Huemer, I think, believes that you can have like substantive a priori knowledge. I don't. So I probably would endorse the view that he's saying that you probably wouldn't want to endorse.
appears that then it just is not a requirement for you to know about something that it causally interacts with you. And so, like, sort of when you're talking about the nature of ethics, that's not a good time to talk about general skeptical arguments that have a wide sweep beyond ethics, right? Like,
I don't see why not. But although, skepticism of a priorism doesn't entail global skepticism or like external world skepticism or any type of super extreme you could be a pragmatist. So you don't have to either accept his views or accept skepticism. There are other ways of rejecting both skepticism and his views.
I think when you're thinking about the nature of value, you should think about problems that are allegedly specific to value.
I think that's fair. It does.
Yeah, I don't think that that's fair. So if you have some background metaphilosophical considerations that downstream of that would jettison whole aspects of moral philosophy, so be it. Those disputes, they're in a certain sense more fundamental. And if conditional on endorsing one of those views, the kinds of considerations one would raise in ethics are just like, it just totally obviates the need to consider them at all. What's wrong with that? So yeah, general criticisms, someone might say, but then you would have to reject, stuff about mathematics. Yep. Then you would have to reject stuff about a priori truths. Yep. Like, I'm fine with that. Lots of philosophers are like, there are empiricists, there are naturalists, and there are pragmatists. Now, is there a freaking army of classical pragmatists? No, but it is like a view within philosophy, and I don't think it's been discredited. The objections I've seen to pragmatism. Look, I've got a few years of talking about the shitty reasons most people seem to give for why moral anti-realism is wrong. If you want to see some absolute shit objections, look at the objections people raise against classical pragmatism. It's it's just like, it's crass expedience. They're just saying if you feel like it's useful, then it's true. Like, just the lowest of the lowbrow, goofy objections to it. Again, this is just me going off on other people. I'm not talking about Huemer here. I've never heard Huemer talk about pragmatism. I'm talking about what I see when I just saw a paper where I was reading the paper, I was enjoying it. And then I got to a part about pragmatism and it's like, well, pragmatism, that's not going to work. And it just gave the most goofy reasons for why pragmatism isn't going to work. And I just stopped reading the paper. It's really, it's frustrating when you have a view that you think is a powerful, viable philosophical stance to take, that it is lurking upstream of these sorts of considerations. I do think it's completely to have those concerns and to raise those concerns. And if they have broader implications for philosophy, again, so be it. It's frustrating when you endorse a view that's sidelined. I mean, look, anti-realism is 26% of analytic philosophers. Pragmatists, there's virtually none of them. Almost nobody identified as a pragmatist. In fact, I'm going to show you just how bad it was. Now, I don't know what was going on with the way they asked the questions, because there's got to be more people sympathetic to pragmatism than how this ended up cashing out. But let me look at it. Target population. Yeah, I'll show you some of the, I guess you could say, the demographics for this. So if you take a look, okay, we'll look at specialization. So it was mostly epistemology, but you'll see metaethics was quite a lot. It's 228 out of the respondents. I believe that's about 13%. So more than 1 out of 10 philosophers specializes in metaethics. That seems super high to me. That doesn't seem right. Like, there's more metaethicists than there are philosophers of logic. Really? Something about that doesn't seem right. You could see it's mostly, look how much the United States dominates in the survey. So if you're wondering whether the results are demographically skewed, the answer is absolutely. So, some countries, there's like 5 people from Portugal, 9 people from Brazil. I mean, that's bizarre. United States of America, look at that. For nationality and then for country of primary affiliation. I mean, United States just dwarfs everything else. Yep. United States of America. Like, look at this. Most countries aren't even represented on the list. Look at this. Every other country than these ones is just 30 people out of the whole survey of 1,785 or something. Absolutely male dominated. Look at that. I mean, so we talk about demographic skew. I mean, this is just wild. Yep, skewed on this. I'm in the 1980s, so pretty well represented there. And then look at this. Look at it. They can't, it rounds down to not even having a bar. Look at that. So analytic, look at that, 1,430 pragmatism. So what's the total amount? We have 13 out of 1,785, I think, is the total. Yeah. So what is 13 out of that? .7% of people said that they're in the pragmatist tradition. So that can't be right. It's got to be a lot of people are like analytic philosophers and pragmatists. Maybe they had to pick one, and because they endorse both, then they're coming up as because so it might look like it's a there's no pragmatists, but yeah, okay, but both what? What the heck does both mean? I don't even know what that means. Both continental and analytic, maybe. That would be my guess. Yeah. But yeah, I mean, that's wild, right? So, yeah, I don't know. I don't know what to do with that. Anyway, let's get back to the video. Oh, I'm streaming the video itself. My bad. That's awesome. There we go.
Seem that objection generalizes to really just a objection to Platonism itself, to that metaphysical account of abstract truth, as you say. So in that respect, it has no special purchase against ethical intuitionism.
Yeah, so like, I mean, if Huemer's saying you wouldn't want to reject Platonism, hell yeah, I do.
Yeah, and by the way, like, there's some other things like, so like if you had a very simple view about knowledge and causation, that to know something you have to interact with it, that means that you can't know anything about the future. That means probably like you can't know anything by induction.
Shoot,
so like,
that's bad.
Like, right, like, because with induction, you observe a sample and then you draw a generalization, but your belief is not caused by the generalization; it's only caused by the sample. Right? So, like, if your belief has to be caused by the fact that makes it true, then you couldn't know the generalization.
Those are good points. So that helps address that first objection. I'll give you that. Got no powerful counter reply. So what about the fact of moral disagreement as probably an objection to the epistemological side of intuitionism, but maybe.
Yeah. So I could say, because before Huemer even responds to this, I'll just say, I don't think disagreement or objections to moral realism are very strong.
The moral realism, that it would seem that lots and lots of people disagree about what is the moral truth. And so that might call into question the reliability of the process by which they come to know moral truth. And I just take it as given that there is substantial moral disagreement. We could disagree about the extent of it, but think of just the political arena in the United States. There's quite pronounced disagreement about a range of ethically relevant intuitionist view. Why is that disagreement not good reason to think that even if there is ethical truth, we don't really have good access to it?
Yeah. I mean, sometimes you should conclude that you don't know the truth, right? So, like, people are way overconfident in their political beliefs, as you sort of alluded to there. So yeah, like, no, if half the country disagrees with you strongly, then you shouldn't be super confident, right? Like, I don't know, there could be exceptions. Like, there could be cases where I guess. Half the country is being stupid, but anyway. But like if this happens over and over again, you should start to think there's something about this area that people have a hard time. Okay. Should you then become a moral skeptic in general? Well, what you could do is you could distinguish the things that people agree about from the things that people disagree about. And you should lower your confidence in your beliefs about the things that people disagree about. But you don't have to lower your confidence in the beliefs that people agree about. Okay. And it just happens that the things that people disagree about get way more attention than the things that they agree about. So like we're not, there are policy debates, but there's no policy debate about like what should our policy be about murder? Like, should we have murder or no murder? And like nobody thinks we should repeal the murder statutes, So okay, but that's why we don't talk about that. Because we don't talk about that, it's like we don't notice that there's substantial agreement, right? Another thing I wanted to say was that actually we have increasing convergence over time. So, it's like thousands of years ago, people used to have different values from the values that we have today in a lot of important respects. Okay, but like across the millennia, and especially the last, couple of centuries, there's been a sort of like convergence towards a broadly Western liberal value system. Okay, so like an example is that slavery used to be very widely practiced across history, and then it started to be abolished in the 1800s. And then there's a remarkable convergence. It is now illegal in every country in the world. Okay, so you just see this sort of like sweeping across the globe. Okay, so it's interesting, right? And then there's other examples that are like that. Okay, like women used to not be allowed to vote, and then this sort of women's suffrage movement started to spread, and now today women can vote in every country where anyone can vote. Not every country is democratic, okay, but also democracy is spreading across the world. It used to be that there were no democracies, and then it's like now like half the world is democratic, and it looks like it's going to spread. It looks like one day the whole world will be democratic. Okay, so then actually, there was this argument from disagreement that maybe there aren't any moral facts because people can't agree, but actually, maybe the evidence is the opposite, like because people are increasingly agreeing, and maybe that's evidence that there are objective facts, right? And by the way, notice that in other areas, like in all of the other sciences, people started out disagreeing and just like having wildly inaccurate views. And if you look at the history of science, you notice that there's just like all of these theories that are wrong. But then over time, there's convergence towards better and better theories.
But in the case of the sciences, the claim was never that we know the truth of scientific theories via intuition. And so I wonder if that raises special problems for just accommodating disagreement across time, because ancient human beings presumably had the same cognitive faculties. And so unless you want to say that their access to the relevant intuitions was different, then what accounts for their inability to grasp what we today would count as fundamental moral truths?
Yeah, I mean, why wouldn't that argument apply to all areas of inquiry, right? They have the same capacities that we have. But they were wrong about everything else also. They were wrong about almost everything, right?
Well, but there's a claim in ethical intuitionism that we apprehend these things immediately through intuition. Whereas in the case of scientific theories, it takes a long chain of inferential reasoning to get there. And as long as you don't think that human reasoning is 100% reliable, well, if you keep multiplying the number of inferences, you're going to get a situation where it's not at all unlikely that the chain would go wrong somewhere.
That sounds like a pretty good objection to me. There does seem to be something where it's more like color perception, right? You wouldn't expect people to converge on agreeing about what colors things are over time. You'd expect them to see what colors they are and agree. We see the apples, they're red. You see murder, you know it's wrong. It shouldn't require a whole bunch of work to get to that point. So, now we have people that grow up thinking murder is wrong and stealing is wrong and slavery is wrong. And people in the past, maybe on murder, but on slavery, people would grow up being taught that slavery is okay. And then they would think it's okay. Now they grow up being taught that it's wrong. So what is calibrating people's moral intuitions on the matter? Is it people approaching the moral truth through some truth conducive practices, or is it culture changing over time? So, we have better explanations for the convergence we've observed than that people are acquiring moral knowledge. Think about all the other ways in which people have converged. All over the world, people have converged in language. Certain languages have spread all over the world, not to totally eradicate other languages, but many languages today are dying off. So there's been convergence in language. There's a death of many languages. There's convergence in cultural practices, religions. Christianity and Islam have spread all over the world. There's, gastronomic practices and music practices. People listen to Taylor Swift everywhere. People eat pizza and fried chicken, and the boba tea is all over the place. I bet I could pop in almost any random country and find a McDonald's, and I could get a Big Mac and some chicken nuggets pretty much anywhere. So we have gastronomic convergence. People wear jeans all over the place. People wear sneakers all over the place. People use cell phones all over the place. Is that evidence of some like fashion realism, of gastronomic realism? People watch similar movies all over the place. They're translated in how many languages is the Avengers translated into? Is that cinematic realism? So as society, I mean, what you had is technology advanced. People got boats and then planes, and they started being able to travel all over the place and interact with one another. And so globalization and cultural interaction has led to the degradation and eradication of some cultures, and other cultures overtaking others, and certain societies broadcasting, they sell their culture and other cultures buy it. And that whole practice isn't an indication that what's being sold is like on normative or evaluative grounds, like objectively good. Just because Coca-Cola is all over the place doesn't mean that it's stance independently tasty. It's just that it's available. You give people Coke, they're going to like it. You give people French fries, they're going to like them. It's not evidence of those. It's not good evidence. It's not best explained by positing that people are somehow responsive to stance-independent gastronomic facts. And it's the same thing with moral practices. Certain cultures overtake other cultures. Certain practices become the norm. As the economy and society change, the culture changes, and part of that culture, and society are their moral values. There's no mystery here. There's no need to posit realism to account for this, any more than we need realism to account for the fact that I'm wearing a t-shirt. I mean, it's silly. You really don't need it. That Mason Colbert says, I had pizza in Madagascar, good pizza too. It's great pizza in Brazil. Great pizza. So I'm trying to think if there's a country I've been to. I had great tacos in London. They were awesome. They had this awesome guajillo sauce. It was a cactus taco with guajillo sauce, and they were phenomenal. Really, really good. What did I have? I had a kanafa today, my favorite dessert. They now have it here, which is amazing. So if you haven't had kanafa, it is wonderful. And they didn't give me. I like all because sometimes they'll put like rose water or something on it. This one I think was orange blossom, and it was pretty good. So yeah, I love kanafa. So you could get that all over the world. Is that gastronomic realism? I don't think so. I'm belaboring the point here though. So let's have a look at the chat. All right. Ben Singleton says, I've heard people argue that a plurality of moral opinions is required for progress. Maybe. That's an interesting suggestion. Clashman the Third says, is moral convergence like a roguelike progression, like we use our intuition points to unlock new moral facts for the next generation to immediately apprehend? Yeah, so there's something a little off about if this is what was going on, like somehow culture is instilling in future generations the ability to immediately apprehend. So it somehow requires culture to see the moral facts. And I think that the Miles is the name. Yeah, is I think exposing features of the way in which the epistemology and the phenomenology of ethical intuitionism is that it's supposed to work doesn't really work in a way that is a good fit for the explanation that Huemer is giving here. But we'll see what Huemer says. Maybe he has a good objection.
You need empirical data and you need observations. Those aren't things you can just create by thinking about them. So there does seem to be a special issue.
Well, so a couple of things, one, intuitionists don't claim that there's no reasoning in ethics, right? So we're not against reasoning, but we do think that reasoning has to start somewhere, which almost everyone else also agrees with. Reasoning has to start somewhere.
Okay.
Okay, but also the reason why people were wrong about almost everything in the history of science wasn't really that there were long chains of reasoning, and then they just made a mistake somewhere in the chain of reasoning, which, by the way, you would expect somebody else to notice.
Well, but to get to the truth requires a long, long chain of inferential reasoning, and so it's going to take time to work through that.
Well,
yeah. So the way in which we figured out scientific truths is that it took generation after generation of people. There's a degree of trial and error. We didn't really have any consistent set of methods and people will say the scientific method as if there's a singular practice that all scientists employ. They all follow this they follow the scientific method flowchart or something. It's not like that. Different fields are broken down and they gather data in different ways. There's observational research and all this stuff. It's not everything is an experiment. So, but nevertheless, it's this sort of a sociocultural phenomenon that developed, and there's, it's a deeply social enterprise, science. It's not like this, like pure, it's not math. Although maybe math has significant social elements to it as well, the way it's practiced. So it probably does. So these are social these are human technologies, and they build on one another cumulatively, not just in terms of the content, like the raw observational data that we have to work with. People gather data. We have star charts and specimens, fossils, and chemicals and that we've isolated. So we have not just the raw data, but we have people that are apprenticed to others that learn their techniques and learn their practices, and they build on them and they add to them, and it's incremental. And so you have this, just as cultural evolution has this cumulative element to it. We take what was already built and we shape it for new generations. We do the same with the sciences. And the point here is that for us to arrive at scientific knowledge, it took a lot of cumulative effort to build it up. Whereas in the case of ethical intuitions, that series, it's not clear why you would need that cumulative series to get to that point. So to even get to the point with certain facts that we figured out about, like in chemistry, you would need the right technology. You would need the right ability to like know what sorts of metal, like what rock to get to extract this thing using this method in this way. And it took past trial and error, past observational research, past development of extraneous technologies, like the right kinds of beakers, the right types of heating devices, the right types of methods of like, creating a vacuum. Like so you need to be able to make a vacuum chamber. And so that would require this convergent expertise and synergy between a host of discoveries and fields and insights. And why would morality be that way? Does it take a bunch of like inferential stuff that's publicly like you corroborate it in order to like be like, yeah, slavery bad? What specifically, like, do we need a long chain of reasoning to get to that point? And there's something weird about that, because when scientists arrive at those points, it's not like each generation of new scientists can see the scientific facts and then they just learn to see new science facts. We don't see shit. Everything about what we know in science is like extraneous to our perception. It's stuff that we have to pick up using our perception, but it's outside of it. It's not part of it. We don't develop internalized quasi-perceptual science seemings. Like that's not how that works. And so why would ethics work that way?
Okay, there's sort of like a long chain of the history, history. Okay, but like the reason why people had incorrect theories, it wasn't that they went through a long chain of reasoning to arrive at those theories most of the time, right? Okay, so like people used to think that there were 4 basic elements in the world: earth, air, fire, and water. That was wrong. That's 100% wrong, right? None of those things is an element. Right? It's like, okay, there are elements, but none of them is earth, air, fire, or water. Anyway, why did they think that? It wasn't that they went through a long chain of reasoning and they made a mistake along the way. Like, no, they guessed. That's what happened. They guessed that maybe there are 4 names. Okay, but anyway, like, well, human beings do that a lot. They guess something, and most.
I don't know the history of science, but I doubt that it was just a guess. There's probably some principled reason why people, maybe very good principles, but there are probably principles for why people had these ideas. I doubt it was just guess, but fair enough. Guess is maybe close enough in practice. I don't know. I don't know what a historian of science would say. DeVos says, have you challenged him to come on and debate you? We already had a discussion.
Guesses are wrong. Okay, and like they kind of did that in ethics too, right? They just sort of like guessed, right? Or it may be even worse. Like they said the thing that was in their own interests, right? Like when we said, you know what, slavery is okay. The slave masters were saying that, not the slaves, right? And the slave masters were saying that because it was in their interest to say that.
So would you say they ignored or downplayed the seemings that they had access to? That this seemed.
Yeah, I mean, well, there are a lot of the problem, and this is in ethics and philosophy and politics. A lot of the problem with people's belief systems is that they're not trying very hard, right? So it's not exactly that they know that it's wrong; they're doing it anyway. It's that they're not thinking hard about whether it was wrong or not. They don't want to know. Right? Like if you've been owning slaves,
Yeah. So I'm not buying that story. Like they don't want to know. I think these people had a host of ideological, in some cases, religious commitments. They had worldviews, and does it's not that they don't want to know. People like when philosophers wrote about this, they would write defenses. They would like account for why they think slavery is morally permissible. Uh, and others, I mean, some would disagree. I don't think Epicurus was a big fan of slaves, but uh, and slavery as a practice. Uh, but no, I don't buy this account that they're like like is he suggesting some deep down they knew it was wrong, but they did it anyway? I don't think so. I think people in the past were just they had shitty moral beliefs, like they sucked. They had awful moral beliefs and they really thought they were okay. And they'd probably lay out reasons why, and they would be bad reasons, but they would give reasons. But I don't know that there would be some like deep down they know it's wrong kind of thing. I don't know. I mean, he could be right about this, but I mean, here now we're doing like psycho-historical speculation. We're speculating on the psychology of his like historical peoples way, way, way in the distant past, where uh, there might be some evidence for the way that what people said at the time that would hint at this one way or the other, but I don't know how easily you could confirm this. And also keep in mind, history is often going to give us a fairly skewed picture of who thought what, because it's not like people went around recording the attitudes, beliefs, and rationales of like the everyday person. So, you know, it's historians might be writing about like nobility at a court or something like that. I doubt that we have that many, much less like well documented and really good accounts of like the general people, the general population in any given civilization at any given time. I know there's some descriptions in some cases, but yeah, I'm not a historian, but it's probably very, very, very skewed and unrepresentative. So psychohistorical speculation is probably not going to get us very far.
all your life, and you have 100 slaves, and you actually can't afford to.
So DeVos says there's evidence that slaveholders saw the hypocrisy in their behaviors. It could be that's plausible, but which slaveholders in which contexts and under what circumstances? Did like Romans that kept slaves have this attitude? And if the Romans did, we could find some other civilization. I don't buy that every civilization was like in a state of dissidence because they didn't have the moral standards that we have today. My guess is that a lot of people were quite comfortable being absolute and total dicks to other people and just being totally awful. Large swaths of human history, human societies would just eradicate other societies. People practice cannibalism; they'd wipe one another out. I don't think all these people are living in a perpetual state of guilt and shame. And it's not. I don't think it's radically. I don't think it's ludicrous to think that they were. But if someone thinks that, present the evidence. And so, if you got some evidence that some slaveholders saw the hypocrisy of their behaviors, I'd need to know more about that. I also don't know how that manifested in their attitudes. They might say, yeah, it's hypocritical. And then they might follow it up by saying that they don't give a shit. So I don't know what they experienced or how does anybody? And so again, we might have some information for some people in some contexts, but I don't know how much you could generalize from that. So people living in the Western world in the 1800s that felt this way, okay, but there were active abolitionist movements at the time. So it's possible that the hypocrisy of their actions was rendered salient to them in the ways that it wouldn't be to like, I don't know, some ancient, like a river valley, empire in 2000 BCE that rounded up some slaves from another tribe and whipped them to death. Did they feel dissonance? Did they think there was any hypocrisy in this? I have absolutely no idea. I don't know.
To free them because you have all these debts or whatever. You don't want to know that it's wrong to hold slaves, and if you don't want to know, you're going to not think about it, right? Because like a lot of the ethical truths that people didn't get are not really hard to see, right? It's just like
he's saying this like it's not hard to see. It's easy with hindsight to be like, yeah, the attitudes people had about like denying women's rights, denying animals' rights, denying the rights of people from different races and different ethnic groups. It like there's a sense in which I could be like, yeah, it seems like how could anybody think that there's any legitimate rationale for just this absolutely monstrous and ridiculous way that people treated one another. Um, I'm not sure that the psychology of the people at the time was this one of like, don't look over there, don't look at the inequality. It might have been just a full-on embrace of this attitude where they're like, no, they would just say that they think these people, people of this group or that group, are not equal and deserve to be treated that way, and they're totally cool with that. And that they're not failing to see some truth. They think that is the truth. So I don't see any good evidence that, historically speaking, in cases where people held despicable beliefs, that they consistently and reliably held them as a like, don't look, just don't pay attention. That is a hypothesis. Is he going to present arguments or evidence for it? Is he just going to assert that this is the case? I feel like he's just going to say that this is the case, and he's not really going to make a convincing case for it being the case.
Really stupid.
Mm. So then, I suppose you would.
Yeah, I'm not saying he's no arguments for this. This is an assertion about how people were. I don't believe the assertion. I suspect it's probably not true.
Give the same answer, but what about the perhaps few, but still very real, substantial moral disagreements that exist not within one culture, but between separate cultures today? And perhaps the most vivid example would be female genital mutilation. I assume that there are some cultures that do not have that sense or seeming that this is wrong, whereas most people in Western cultures, when they reflect on it, are horrified by the practice.
Yeah, I think we can.
Yeah, so I think that Huemer would have a pretty strong response here, which is to say that in many cases, people may have fundamentally similar moral beliefs, but then they have false non-moral beliefs. So some people may carry out really awful things like this because they think that there are like morally beneficial consequences, and I would just agree with Huemer, hopefully, that Huemer would agree with me that they're wrong about those facts and those actions are wrong, but the reason they think they're right is because of their belief in the non-moral facts. So take something like human sacrifice. You could say, well, how come people didn't realize human sacrifice was wrong? You know, but think about the context in which someone might say, okay, but I'm sacrificing humans to appease an angry God that will wipe out destroy civilization if I don't sacrifice the people. Now, if a person genuinely believes that, now it do you let society and civilization get destroyed because you're refusing to sacrifice some people? I'm not sure that that's actually accurately describes any theology any ancient people endorsed, but the point would just be, if a person thinks like the volcano god is going to totally destroy your civilization if you don't throw this one person in a volcano, now you're in a kind of like trolley problem type scenario where that's a better rationale for throwing a person in a volcano than let's just throw them in a volcano because we for fun. Now, is it a morally justified one? That's going to depend on your ethics. If you're a deontologist and you think you shouldn't do that, then maybe you just let the volcano wipe everybody out. Maybe. I'm not going to take a stand on that. The point would just be that the reason why they're like, if you convince them there's no volcano god, they're going to go, oh shit, let's not throw anybody in there. And so the point would just be that moral disagreements in some cases are downstream of differences in non-moral beliefs about what's true or false. And if you change the non-moral beliefs, the moral beliefs follow from that. Like if you could show people a counterfactual universe in which they stopped engaging in some awful practice, and then things were like much better, they might be like, oh shit, we shouldn't have been doing that. We're just doing this awful thing to people and harming them. And then it turns out like all we're doing is harming people. And like the harm that we're causing is both awful at the time and then also makes society worse for that person and for everybody else. And then they might just go, yeah, whoopsie. And then they stop doing it. But there could just be people that are sadistic, brutal, awful people. I do think those exist. And they might want to continue doing this stuff. But I don't know what follows from that philosophically.
Can say that it's wrong. Like, I don't think that's not a hard one. That's clearly wrong. Yeah, and why is that? Well, what happened was that they got messed up by religion, right? Because I think 100%, about 100% of the people who endorse that practice are Muslims, right? Or some religion, but I think they're maybe all Muslims or almost all Muslims. Okay, so what happened was that they believe a religion that is not factually true, right?
Yeah, I don't know if his account here is accurate, and I don't really like covering this topic very much, but we'll get through it, I guess.
As a matter of objective fact, it is not true. God did not say any of this stuff. Okay, so like sometimes your moral errors are due to factual errors, right? Although there's
right, it's not moral errors due to factual errors. So that's, I think, the response he should give, and I think it's a good response.
Clear cut, because like Okay. So, like sometimes your moral errors are due to factual errors, right? Although it's not completely clear cut because, like, well, it might be that part of why they hold this religion is also that they have bad values, and they sort of like, you sort of like choose the religion partly on the basis of your values, and also people some like if you don't like some of the value claims of your religion, you might just reject them. Okay, so like like there's stuff in the Bible where I don't know, like it says that you should stone gay people to death for being gay, and virtually no Christian believes that, as far as I know today. There was a time when they did, okay, but now they just reject it because it's just obviously not true. So that's just obviously wrong. So anyway, okay, so you could say, well, so why don't the Muslims just reject that? Actually, I don't even know if that's in the Quran or in the Hadith, or if they just made that up. So okay, but anyway, so I don't know why they believe this thing about genital mutilation. Okay, but you might think, well, why don't they just sense that it's bad and then just reject it? Just like people with other religions will reject the parts of their religion that seem wrong. Okay, yeah, I don't know if it's part of the religion. Okay, anyway, but why don't they reject? Yeah, I don't know. Probably they have like their emotional reaction is interacting with their religion, and they're sort of like using the religion as an excuse for not reflecting on how it would seem wrong.
Yeah, it's like they're using the religion as an excuse for not reflecting on how it's wrong. I am not buying his account here. Uh, the Christians historically haven't just not reflected on these things; they've reflected and come to contrary views, based largely on non-moral beliefs, like certain theological commitments and that sort of thing. But on this psychological account he's offering I don't find it plausible. I'm curious what the audience thinks. Do you find this plausible? They're just not reflecting. Let's see what he says again there.
Is interacting with their religion, and they're sort of like using the religion as an excuse.
Yeah, using the religion as an excuse. But why would they use the religion as an excuse? Like, if he didn't already want to, like, does he think that they just want to do bad things and then the religion is excusing their desire to do the bad things? Is that what's going on? What exactly is the psychological story here? And also, what's the evidence for this? And is this supposed to be a universal account? What proportion of Christians or Muslims or whoever or whatever religion, like they're all just excusing their actions? I don't think that's a look. People in most cases, they're taught a religion, they accept the religion, and this, and it's usually more complicated than that because it's rarely like, well, these are the doctrines of the religion. Religions are also often like closely associated with certain cultural practices that are not necessarily part of the doctrine. It's a lot of complicated stuff that goes on. But so you get, and sometimes it's like a package deal. They tend to coincide, but they can come apart. So you could get the religion without some of the cultural practices. You could get the cultural practices without the religion. A lot of times that can happen. But anyway, people just internalize things that they're taught at a young age, and they think those things are right and wrong, or whatever, and then they act accordingly. And they may not question it a whole lot, but there doesn't have to be dissonance, and there doesn't have to be a sense that they're going, "Ugh, I don't want to know what's true," and they don't have to be committed to doing things that you and I would consider bad, like harming people or treating people unequally or whatever it might be. Like they want to do the thing, and then they go, "Ooh, what can I do?" The religion will excuse it. That doesn't strike me as a plausible account of what people tend to do. I'm sure people sometimes do that. Like it would be weird if people didn't rationalize their bad motives by appealing to some locally available justification for it. Of course, people do that. But is that like a good general description of what everybody's doing, or what a large proportion or the majority of people are doing in any particular case? I don't think so.
For not reflecting on how it would seem wrong, right? But the reason they want that excuse is that they have this emotional reaction that, like, they don't like the idea of women having sexual pleasure. Like, it makes them uncomfortable. And so they need an excuse for thinking that it's okay to stop women from having that. And then,
So what I'll say about this is this is a complicated psychological hypothesis, and this is he's a philosopher making psychological claims. He's not reporting or providing any empirical evidence to support those claims, and his claims may or may not be true. I suspect they're probably not true in most cases, and they're probably true in some cases. Like if I said, hey, some people are psychopaths that like to torture people just for fun, that would be true. But if I said people are psychopaths that torture people for fun, which people? Like in general? What do you mean by that? So there's an underspecificity in his claim here that makes it very hard to evaluate, but it at the very least is some sort of not very well specified psychological hypothesis. And again, like in the previous case, he seemed to be making empirical claims that he didn't provide any evidence for. I'm going to predict he's not going to provide any evidence for these. He's asserting that this is what's going on, but like, look, psychologists are having a hell of a hard time figuring out what's going on when we have data. If we're not even looking at data or appealing to data or conducting our own research, to like, it's one thing to report your seemings on like a priori matters. This is not an a priori matter. This is an empirical matter. So intuitions aren't going to cut it. Like, where's the evidence for these claims?
But then because
Yeah. So Evan Landry says it's a just so story. I think that's right. He's offering a just so story, and it could be true. Just so stories could be true, but why should I think that they're true? I mean, no, the irony too, if he's appealing to this to render it consistent with his view, it's awfully convenient to have a ready-made explanation that's consistent with it. Like, hey, there were some observations we make that are a problem for your view. Why? How could they be made consistent with your view? Oh, here's how they could be consistent. True, but are you right about that? So, if to make it consistent with your view, you have to make empirical claims. It's awfully convenient if you think that the pure empirical facts just happen to be of a kind that turns out in favor of your view. They may or may not be. And what would happen if the empirical facts don't support his case? I'm not sure, but I doubt he's going to stop endorsing realism. So there's got to be a bunch of other reasons that would weigh against this. Like, why can't this just be an L for realism? And he could just say, yeah, that's not really consistent with my case for moral realism, but I think I have overall like the preponderance of reasons are greater. Now, he's not giving that L to realism. And maybe this is a case where he should. I don't know.
because they believe this religion, then they have an excuse. So okay, anyway. So yeah, there's I'm sort of like psychologizing why people would have incorrect ethical
Hey, what's up,
views.
Sabir?
But anyway, but like the best explanation.
So he's saying I'm psychologizing. I think that's some acknowledgement that he's speculating here, and that's good for him to throw that in there. I do think it'd be better if he said, "I'm psychologizing, and of course these are empirical claims, and I'm not really sure," or something like that. It'd be nice if he said that. He didn't say that. There's some qualifier here. I would like to see more qualification here.
Explanation is not that there's no. Okay, anyway. So yeah, there's I'm sort of like psychologizing why people would have incorrect ethical views. But anyway, but like the best explanation is not that there's no fact. Right. The best explanation is that human beings have complicated psychology that is not super truth oriented. Like most human beings are.
Well, those are consistent. I would say people have a complicated psychology that's not truth oriented, and there's no facts.
Not all that strongly oriented towards truth.
That is the case. I think that's a good reply. So I have this quote here that I'm going to throw at you, and I want to get your take. Critics of intuitionism can claim that the fact that there is disagreement between moral philosophers and even between intuitionists themselves undermines the view that certain propositions are self-evident. These philosophers will have thought long and hard about the relevant propositions, and, we would hope, have a very clear understanding of them. One would therefore expect that if there were certain moral propositions, the truth of which could be apprehended by intuition, then moral philosophers would converge on these truths. Persistent disagreement amongst reflective, thoughtful, and comprehending moral philosophers may cast doubt on the view that any of these propositions are self-evident. Back to you, Michael Huemer.
Yeah, I mean, wait, who's that from?
That's from the Stanford Encyclopedia article on ethical intuitionism. The author on that.
Yeah, whoever that is. Okay. Well, this is really painting with a broad brush, which is one of the problems in metaethics, that somebody just says, ethical truths aren't self-evident because people disagree about ethical truths. What ethical truths are you talking about? Because they're not all the same. There's not just like one proposition or whatever. Okay. So there are things that people disagree about, and then there are things that people agree about. So if you're trying to say like the things that there's very widespread disagreement about, the highly controversial truths are not self-evident, and also if by self-evident you mean absolutely certain, then you're right. Okay, but then if you mean even the things that people do agree about, we still don't know because there are other things that they disagree about, that seems like an invalid inference, right? Okay, and like, I was mentioning that there's increasing convergence on ethical propositions over time. There's a lot of disagreement in ethics, but virtually everyone in ethics, virtually like every ethicist, has a broadly liberal value system and like agrees with each other on a number of actually really important things where they disagree with people who lived 2,000 years ago. So like I know of no ethicist today who thinks that slavery is just.
Yeah, I mean, again, so most philosophers have broadly liberal views. We can't account for that by sociological considerations. Like we have to posit realism to account for that, or that it's the best explanation. I mean, he's not saying it's the only explanation, but realism is not the best explanation for this. Like sociocultural considerations would account for why philosophers tend to be liberal.
And that's not a trivial example, because that's actually really important. It's really important to know that it's unjust. Okay, and we've converged on that. We have an agreement on that. And then nobody, like we don't talk about it anymore because everybody knows, okay? But, if somebody starts saying, oh, there's no agreement in ethics, then it's relevant to bring up examples like that.
So what accounts for the difference between the self-evident ethical truths and the non-self-evident ones? So what accounts for the fact that murder is wrong, is agreed upon and self-evident, but healthcare is a universal human right is apparently not self-evident
See you later,
and
Patrick.
agreed upon? Like, what would the intuitionists say about to explain the difference there?
I mean, usually it's that there's some further reason why the thing is the case. So, well, it could also be because people have different sorts of biases. So there are various reasons why people can go wrong in their ethical judgments. And people use a sort of heuristic that I call the affect heuristic, right? Or the attraction aversion heuristic, which is you think about something and then you think about some state of affairs, and if you feel attracted to it, then you conclude that it's good. Or if you feel an aversion to it, then you conclude that it's bad. That works a lot, right? Because if you're normal, you're averse to bad things. You'll generally be attracted to good things. However, the degree of your feeling of attraction or aversion is not necessarily proportional to the badness or goodness or badness of the thing. Right? So you can go wrong. And sometimes you could have sort of like self-centered biases, like the way your personal interests that in a way that doesn't generalize to other people. Okay, so now now I've kind of like forgotten what prompt started me on talking about that.
Oh, to explaining.
Mason says, it strikes me as doubly bizarre Huemer cites a liberal consensus when he himself defended anarcho-capitalism. He has a paper addressing this, so go have a look at it. I think it's almost written as like a response to his previous paper, which I think is really funny. He's like, here's a critique of Huemer from Huemer. And he addresses this point in the paper, and it's pretty interesting. I don't agree with it, but it's interesting. Well, I don't like, there might be stuff I agree with in the paper, but generally speaking, I'm not buying into his meta-ethical approach. But yeah, he does actually address that.
Why certain moral principles are obvious.
Right. I got distracted by you saying that because I thought it was an interesting point, and I know he addresses this somewhere. Let's try to find the paper. I'll throw it in the chat. Give me 1 second. If someone knows the paper, throw it in there and I'll. I got it. Here it is. Okay, so we will pin that. And Mason, you may want to check that out. So you could see that Huemer addresses that. So I'll read the abstract. And this is from Mike Huemer. In earlier work, I argued that observed changes in moral values over human history are best explained as cognitive progress. Societies tend over the long term to move closer to the objective moral truth. It is also true that in recent decades, liberal democracies have moved strongly in the direction of greater government regulation and wealth redistribution. Does this mean that extensive regulation and redistribution are objectively good? I argue that the answer is no. These recent trends are importantly different from earlier examples of moral progress in ways that enable them to be satisfyingly explained without adverting to objective moral correctness. Okay, there you go. Oh, one moment.
Okay, so now now I've kind of like forgotten what prompt started me on talking about that.
Oh, to explaining why certain moral principles are obvious or self-evident and why others there's still
yeah.
much
So murder,
about.
yeah,
Murder's
bad,
wrong, and then healthcare, universal human right.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah. So I was going to say, about healthcare being a right. I mean, there's probably further reasoning behind why that would or wouldn't be a right. And so there's probably a more complex and more subtle thinking process. But also, it's well, it might be that people are saying that because it makes you feel a certain way when you say that. And like some people like it, and then some people don't like it. The libertarian argument for why it's not a universal right is that rights have to be composable, and there's a negative right against like being forced to work for people or being forced to give you resources or something like that, and then that's just not composable with positive rights. Okay, but so like it's not like the people who are against that just say, oh, it's just self-evident that there's no such right. Like they give reasons. Okay, but also like if you think that it is a right, you could give arguments for why there's such a right. So like maybe there could be a real utilitarian rationale behind why we have a certain system of rights, and then we could have like some discussion about whether it would be good to have a system in which that counts as a right. Right. Whereas in the case of murder, there just isn't really any case. There's not any case to be made for allowing murder. Like there's nobody who thinks that if we changed our system so that was allowed, then it would be better.
He says nobody.
That is true.
But I bet you
So
could
there's this
find.
sense-
I bet you could find at least one person that thinks if we legalize murder, it'd be good. You could find one.
In which the intuitionist isn't committed to the claim that all moral truths will form the foundation or the bedrock of our inferential chain of reasoning. Some moral truths take a long discursive process to arrive at. It's not like those ones we can just see and apprehend. Rather, there's always going to be reasons that you give that were the justification for that moral belief. Rather, you didn't apprehend it directly. It was, okay, I reflected on this idea of negative rights and positive rights. I saw the conflict. Is that kind of the idea?
Yeah. And by the way, like, for anyone who wants to, you want to know, like, oh, how could somebody reason, or like, what happens when you disagree? Look at the moral philosophy literature. There's extensive literature in ethics in which people argue about controversial ethical questions, and they don't just emote at each other. They don't just shout at each other, they're wrong, whatever. They give reasons. And by the way, all of the arguments are based on intuitions, although they're not always labeled that way, right? Not everyone uses the word intuition, but all of the arguments in the ethics literature start from premises. None of them has an infinite regress of reasons. And some of them might go in a circle, I guess. Some people might give circular arguments. Anyway, those are bad. The ones that are not circular, they start from somewhere. Okay, and the place that they start from will it be something that seems right to the person, or will it be something that seems wrong? Okay, so then they'll be at least treating it like an intuition, right?
I think that's obviously right. And I myself have made that.
I do not. So that doesn't seem obviously right to me. So I have values, but my values aren't intuitions. I don't think that they seem correct or seem true. So I prefer that there be less murder and violence and stuff, but I don't have intuitions about that. And there would be nothing stopping me from building a normative ethical system and arguing for it and trying to make intersubjective appeals. Hey, I want there to be less murder. Do you want there to be less murder? Oh, you do too? Okay, let's work that out. So, compare to trade. So, hey, you've got water, I've got trees. You could build a house out of the logs. I need fresh water. You want to trade? And so we trade. So I make appeals because I might think, hey, you want to build a house, right? That there's no intuitions involved in that. It's, hey, do you want to build a house? Yes, I do want to build a house. I got logs over here. Do you want to buy my logs? Yes, I would like to buy your logs. What do you got? Oh, I got water. I got a big old supply, or I got metal. I got iron. I have iron mines. Oh, great. So I'll sell you lumber. You sell me iron, right? And so you trade. And so I make appeals based on what I think you want, and I can maybe I'm right or I'm wrong. You make appeals based on what I want, and we set up trade. In the case of like moral philosophy, I see it more like diplomacy or trade or negotiation of social coordination. So think about if you and a group of friends are trying to solve a problem. Hey, where should we go get dinner? It's a question of coordination. It's not a question of appealing to what you think is true. So I don't think 100% of people doing moral philosophy historically have all appealed to seemings about what's true. I think there's been at least a couple of them that have approached things the way I do. One, I just think his descriptive claim is probably false. But then two, it's certainly not the only way one could do moral philosophy. So I don't think it's the only way people have done moral philosophy, and I don't think it's the only way they could do moral philosophy. I think intuitions are mostly useless, and that we don't need them, and that we should probably largely avoid them. I don't really care about what seems true to people. Now there might be a certain sense in which someone could say, well, this seems true to me. Does it seem true to you? And so we're intersubjectively navigating shared intuitions. Maybe he could just say, okay, well, then that's what you're doing in many of these cases. And maybe that's true. So someone could say, sure. Okay, Lance. So your moral standards, those express your values, but you do have seemings about like your perceptual seemings and other sorts of seemings. then that might be the case. But I don't know about the intellectual seemings. I don't know if I have those. I don't know if I need those. I might just, can I get by with just perceptual seemings? Maybe so. I'm not sure. So he might be right that most philosophers have been doing what he says. And maybe he would say, yeah, maybe there's a couple weirdos like Lance. And I'm not talking about them. I'm talking about what most people do. So, and then maybe if he qualified the claim, then he would be saying something true.
Point. So I'm gratified to hear you make it as well. That seems undeniable. I think also in metaphysics generally, philosophy generally, you can't get away from intuition properly defined. But even that,
properly defined. I mean, that's doing a lot of the work here. Properly defined. I'd love to see a proper definition. I suspect you probably can get away from intuitions. Yeah. So Devos says John Stuart Mill on intuitions is based. He has some great remarks. I forget, where are they? I went and dug them up not that long ago, and I was reading his remarks on intuitions, and I was like, yeah, this is good stuff. Devos, do you remember where that is in Mill's work? Because I know it's like one of those things you could just find, because all his books you could just find them online. Like I know it's in there somewhere. So we're at an hour and 45, and we've got about 30 minutes of the video to go. Let's see what the rest is. World truth via intuition and motivation to be moral. Planning his arguments against naturalism. Cool. So there's more stuff. So we'll do part 3. I'm going to wrap it up there. And but I do have a question from David Zhu. Lance, how would you analyze more complicated cases involving uncertainty that looks partially normative and partially descriptive? Do animals suffer? Ooh, those are going to be real tough questions. Those are going to be tough questions. I'm not up for addressing that now. If I'm doing a video on consciousness, at some point we could talk about animals and consciousness, and that would be a point where I'd want to talk about that some more. But yeah, those are tough cases. I don't know what to do about those. Part of what's going to end up happening is I'm going to have to like start waving the pragmatist flag and make a point of saying that values and like facts kind of converge and collapse into one another, and that this would be true of almost any theory or position I would take on almost anything. And so these would be cases where that's especially salient, but that values, I think, are playing a role in our judgments in pretty much everything. Evan says, morally wrong for you not to finish the video. I'm not finishing the video. My throat is a little bit sore. I've been teaching and talking a lot, and I was choking earlier when I had to restart the stream. So I'm not going to push myself and lose my voice. I have to teach again in a couple of days, and I don't want to lose my voice. And I do lose my voice. I talk a lot. Like, look, I do these streams for fun. So what's my hobby? My hobby is to sit here and talk at a screen for 3 hours. I mean, that's a ridiculous hobby. I'm a talker. So when I teach classes, I lose my voice. Oh yeah. And then I had office hours today and I was talking and talking. My God. Okay. Deval says, I don't remember. I'll look and come back for round 3. Great. So we'll do that. Thank you everybody for being here. Do like the video, subscribe to the channel, leave a comment in the comment section. I love all that stuff. Share the video around. If you're on Twitter or Blue Sky or Facebook or wherever, share the video. Throw a link out there. This one I saw that someone had linked to the previous video. Other than that, thanks everybody for being here. I love having such an active audience. You really make it feel like I'm not recording a video that's live, but like there's nobody really there. That would be lame and boring. So I'm glad you're all here. I'm glad people are willing to stick out this content, like just excessive, extensive, just endless meta ethics. There's more stuff, I know, because I kept promising I'm going to bring more content, and I did. I brought other stuff onto the channel, but it's still mostly meta ethics, and that's just what I do. And I don't know why. It's like if I got on here and I talk about, hey, look, someone's probably got a channel on Legos where they just talk about Legos for like years, and I bet the channel's awesome, and people that like Legos go to the channel. So I'm the meta ethics of Legos guy, or the Legos of meta ethics. None of those make sense. I'm out of here. None of that made sense. See y'all later. Oh no, outro video. Where are you? Here it is. All right, I got it. See y'all later.